Welcome back to the channel. Today we are diving deep into one of the most iconic action-adventure films of the early 2000s. We are talking about Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life, the 2003 sequel that brought the legendary video game heroine back to the big screen in a bigger, bolder, and more thrilling adventure than ever before. This film is packed with globe-trotting action, ancient mythology, deadly villains, and one of cinema's most recognizable female protagonists. So sit back, get comfortable, and let us get into everything you need to know about this film, from its origins and production to its story, cast, and legacy. Overview. Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life is a 2003 American action-adventure film directed by Jan de Bont, who is well known for directing high-octane blockbusters such as Speed and Twister. The film was produced by Lawrence Gordon and Lloyd Levin and distributed by Paramount Pictures. It serves as the direct sequel to the 2001 film Lara Croft, Tomb Raider, and is once again based on the enormously popular video game franchise created by Core Design and published by Eidos Interactive. The game series, which originally launched in 1996, introduced the world to Lara Croft, a British archaeologist and adventurer with extraordinary athletic ability, sharp intelligence. This sequel was produced with a budget of approximately $95 million, making it a major Hollywood production. The screenplay was written by Dean George Arras, who crafted a story that pulls heavily from ancient mythology, specifically the legend of Pandora's box. The film blends elements of archaeology, mythology, espionage, and action into a fast-paced narrative that sends Lara Croft across multiple continents and into some of the most visually spectacular locations ever captured on film. From underwater ruins off the coast of Greece to the vast savannas of Africa and the remote mountains of China, the film uses its global scope to create an atmosphere of genuine adventure and danger. The film was produced by a combination of American and British production companies, with significant involvement from Mutual Film Company and the UK-based Lawrence Gordon Productions. A large portion of the film was shot on location across real international settings, giving it an authentic and expansive feel that sets it apart from many of its contemporaries. The production brought together a cast of internationally recognized performers and placed them in physically demanding sequences that required extensive stunt coordination, underwater filming, and large-scale action choreography. At its heart, the film is a race against time. A mysterious and powerful artifact known as Pandora's box has been discovered, and the wrong people are desperate to get their hands on it. The box, according to ancient legend, does not simply contain a collection of evils but is instead described in this film as a biological weapon of unimaginable destructive power, capable of wiping out all of humanity. It falls to Lara Croft to find it first, and ensure it never falls into the wrong hands. Plot details. The story begins dramatically with an underwater earthquake near the coast of Santorini, Greece. The seismic event causes a portion of the ancient sunken Temple of Pandora to rise from the ocean floor. Lara Croft, portrayed once again by Angelina Jolie, is diving in the area and is pulled into the temple by the powerful underwater currents. Inside, she encounters a group of mercenaries led by a man named Lo, who is also searching the ruins. The mercenaries manage to steal a mysterious glowing orb that Lara identifies as a key artifact related to the location of Pandora's box. After a spectacular underwater battle, Lara is captured, nearly killed by a shark that has been deliberately set on her, and eventually escapes through sheer skill and determination. Upon returning to England, Lara is approached by MI6, the British intelligence agency, who inform her that the orb has been stolen by Lo and that it is connected to a man named Dr. Jonathan Rice, a former Nobel Prize-winning scientist who has turned his genius toward bioterrorism and is now one of the most wanted men in the world. Rice wants Pandora's box not as a historical artifact, but as the ultimate biological weapon. He intends to use the ancient plague contained within it to sell death to the highest bidder. MI6 asks Lara to retrieve the orb and ultimately locate Pandora's box before Rice can obtain it. To accomplish this mission, Lara makes a controversial and personally complicated decision. She requests the release of a man named Terry Sheridan, a former Royal Marine who was once her lover but who betrayed his unit and was consequently imprisoned for treason. Lara knows that Terry has connections and knowledge of the criminal underworld that she will need to navigate in order to find Chen-Lo. Despite her deep personal mistrust of Terry, who is charming, unpredictable, and dangerous, she accepts him as her partner for this mission. The dynamic between Lara and Terry forms one of the emotional and dramatic backbones of the film, creating a tension that runs alongside the larger action narrative. Lara and Terry travel to Hong Kong and then into mainland China, where they track down Chen-Lo and his gang in a breathtaking sequence set on the rooftops and streets of Shanghai. Using motorcycles and extraordinary athleticism, Lara chases Chen-Lo across the city in one of the film's most celebrated action sequences. She eventually recovers the orb, but Chen-Lo is subsequently murdered by Dr. Rice, who eliminates his own associate to prevent any loose ends. This raises the stakes considerably, as it reveals just how ruthless and calculating Rice truly is. With the orb in hand, Lara must now decipher its secrets in order to locate Pandora's box. The orb, it turns out, functions as a kind of ancient navigational device or map, and it projects a star map when exposed to moonlight. By studying the star patterns and cross-referencing ancient historical and mythological records, Lara determines that the Cradle of Life, which is the location where Pandora's box has been hidden for millennia, is situated somewhere deep in Africa. The term Cradle of Life refers both to the mythological origin point of civilization and to the idea that whatever is contained within the box has the power to end life just as completely as it was once begun. Lara and Terry travel to Africa and make their way into a remote and visually stunning landscape. They eventually discover the entrance to the Cradle of Life, a hidden underground world of extraordinary scale and beauty, a place that feels genuinely ancient and untouched by time. Deep within this subterranean realm, they find Pandora's box. However, Dr. Rice has been tracking them the entire time, having used his own resources and inside information to follow their journey. He arrives with armed men and a confrontation becomes inevitable. At the climax of the film, Lara faces a profound moral dilemma. She cannot allow Pandora's box to leave the Cradle of Life, because unleashing its contents on the world would mean the end of human civilization. At the same time, she is faced with the unpredictable and dangerous Terry Sheridan, who, in a betrayal that is both heartbreaking and consistent with his established character, chooses personal gain over doing the right thing. He attempts to take the box for himself or align himself with the wrong side, forcing Lara into one of the most emotionally difficult decisions of her life. She kills Terry, a moment that is handled with genuine weight and emotional restraint by the film, and then she destroys Pandora's box by throwing it into the abyss at the center of the Cradle of Life, sending it back into the depths from which it came. Rice is killed in the final confrontation, the box is lost forever, and the threat is eliminated. Lara returns from Africa having completed her mission but having paid a deeply personal cost. The film ends with Lara back at Croft Manor, reflective and composed, as she always is, but carrying the weight of what she has done. It is a more emotionally complex ending than most action films of its era, and it gives the character of Lara Croft a genuine sense of depth and consequence. Cast: Angelina Jolie returns to the lead role of Lara Croft, and her performance in this sequel is widely considered to be stronger and more confident than her portrayal in the first film. Jolie had already established herself as one of Hollywood's most compelling and physically capable actresses, and she throws herself into the role with complete commitment. She performs many of her own stunts, and her screen presence anchors every scene she appears in. Jolie's Lara Croft is intelligent, emotionally controlled, physically extraordinary, and occasionally vulnerable in ways that make the character feel genuinely human rather than simply superhuman. Gerard Butler plays Terry Sheridan, the morally compromised former Royal Marine who partners with Lara for this mission. Butler, who would go on to become an enormous action star in his own right, particularly following the release of 300 in 2007, brings considerable charisma and dangerous charm to the role. His chemistry with Jolie is palpable and complicated, which is exactly what the role requires. He is never simply a villain or simply a hero, and that ambiguity makes him one of the more interesting supporting characters in the film. Sire Hines plays Dr. Jonathan Rice, the primary antagonist of the film. Hines is a classically trained Irish actor with an extraordinary range, and he brings genuine menace and intelligence to the role of Rice. He does not play the villain as a caricature but instead as a man of genuine intellect who has simply chosen to apply his considerable gifts toward catastrophic ends. His calm and methodical approach to villainy makes him more unsettling than a more theatrical antagonist would have been. Chris Berry reprises his role as Hilary, Lara's loyal and long-suffering butler, providing moments of dry British humor that offer a welcome contrast to the high-stakes action. Noah Taylor also returns as Bryce, Lara's tech-savvy sidekick who operates out of a customized trailer and provides technical support and comic relief. Til Schweiger appears as a secondary villain associated with the criminal network that Lara must navigate, and he brings a cold efficiency to his relatively limited screen time. Simon Yam appears as Chun Lo, the mercenary who steals the orb in the opening sequence. Yam is a prolific and highly respected Hong Kong actor, and his presence gives the film's Hong Kong sequences an additional layer of authenticity. Release date and box office. Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life was released in the United States on July 25, 2003. In the United Kingdom, it was released on August 22, 2003. The film opened at number 1 at the North American box office during its opening weekend, earning approximately $21.7 million domestically in its first 3 days. Its worldwide total gross was approximately $156 million against a production budget of around $95 million, making it a moderate commercial performer. While it did not match the box office success of its predecessor, which had earned over $274 million worldwide, it was still considered a respectable international performer. The film received a mixed critical reception upon its release. Many critics praised Jolie's performance, the film's stunning cinematography, its ambitious global scale, and several individual action sequences. The underwater opening sequence and the Shanghai motorcycle chase were particularly highlighted as standout moments. However, some critics felt the script did not give adequate room for the story to breathe between its set pieces, and the film's pacing was occasionally cited as an issue. Despite these criticisms, audiences who came to see Angelina Jolie in action largely found what they were looking for. Legacy and impact. Despite being a commercially moderate sequel, Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life holds an important place in the history of action-adventure cinema. It was one of the relatively rare big-budget Hollywood blockbusters of its era to be built entirely around a female protagonist who was not defined by a romantic subplot or a male counterpart, but by her own extraordinary competence and agency. Lara Croft, as portrayed by Angelina Jolie, was a character who drove the narrative entirely on her own terms, and that made the films significant cultural artifacts of their time. The film also cemented Angelina Jolie's status as one of Hollywood's premier action stars, a reputation she would go on to build upon with subsequent films. The legacy of the Tomb Raider franchise itself has continued long after these two films, with a reboot film released in 2018 starring Alicia Vikander, and the video game series itself having been successfully relaunched with a new trilogy beginning in 2013. But for an entire generation of audiences, the definitive image of Lara Croft remains Angelina Jolie, twin pistols drawn, standing before some ancient ruin with absolute fearlessness in her eyes. The film is also notable for its genuine commitment to practical filmmaking. The production traveled to real locations in the United Kingdom, Greece, China, Hong Kong, and Kenya, giving the film a visual authenticity that purely studio-bound productions cannot replicate. The underwater sequences were filmed using specialized cameras and real divers, and the Africa sequences made use of the actual landscape to extraordinary visual effect. This dedication to location work gives the film a texture and atmosphere that holds up remarkably well even decades after its release. Here is the complete story of Lara Croft Tomb Raider, the Cradle of Life told in full, lengthy detail. The story begins not in a museum or a library, not in the quiet halls of Croft Manor, but beneath the surface of the sea. Off the coast of the Greek island of Santorini, one of the most ancient and storied places on Earth, a powerful underwater earthquake sends tremors through the ocean floor. The seismic event is violent and sudden, and its impact on the underwater geological formations surrounding the island is immediate and dramatic. What the earthquake disturbs is not merely rock and sand. It stirs something that has been hidden for thousands of years, something that human civilization had forgotten existed, something that was built long before recorded history to protect a secret of unimaginable consequence. A vast and ancient structure, a submerged temple of extraordinary architecture, begins to rise partially from the depths as the earthquake reshapes the underwater terrain around it. Lara Croft is in the water when this happens. She is not there by coincidence. She has been diving in the Aegean Sea near Santorini, drawn by her lifelong fascination with lost civilizations and ancient mysteries. When the earthquake begins, she is caught in the powerful currents that the shifting seabed creates, and those currents drag her toward the rising structure. She is pulled inside the temple through an opening in the ancient stonework, swept into a place where no living person has set foot in millennia. What she finds inside takes her breath away. The interior of the temple is intact in ways that defy rational explanation, preserved by the ocean floor and by whatever ancient construction techniques were used to build it. The architecture is clearly Greek in origin, consistent with structures built in honor of the gods of the ancient world, and the craftsmanship is extraordinary. Lara begins to explore the temple's interior, her training and instincts guiding her through the submerged chambers. She is a woman who has spent her entire adult life in places exactly like this one, dangerous, ancient, and full of secrets, and she moves through it with the calm efficiency of someone who has learned to treat the extraordinary as routine. But she is not alone inside the temple. A group of armed mercenaries has also entered the structure, led by a man named Chen Lo, a cold and calculating criminal with connections to some of the world's most dangerous underground networks. Chen Lo and his men are not archaeologists or historians. They have no interest in understanding what the temple represents, or what it means for the history of human civilization. They are there for one specific thing, an object that their employer has told them to retrieve at any cost. That object is a glowing orb, approximately the size of a large grapefruit, made of a material unlike anything produced by modern civilization. The orb sits within the temple in a place of obvious importance, clearly positioned at the center of the structure's design, clearly meant to be preserved and protected by the surrounding architecture. Lara sees it, and immediately understands that it is significant. She has the knowledge of ancient history and mythology to recognize what she is looking at, even if she cannot yet articulate precisely what the orb is or what it does. Chen Lo's men get to it first and take it, and a confrontation in the underwater darkness of the temple follows. Lara fights with everything she has, but the mercenaries have numbers and firepower on their side. They escape with the orb, and in the chaos of their departure, they leave Lara in a desperate situation. To ensure she does not follow them or survive to cause problems, one of Chen Lo's men releases a shark into the temple chamber where Lara is trapped. It is a brutal and deliberate act, intended to end her life with absolute efficiency. Lara has no weapons capable of killing a shark in open water, and the space within the temple is confined enough that escape requires both speed and intelligence. She uses her environment with the kind of creative problem-solving that defines her as an adventurer. She finds a way to outmaneuver the shark and escape the temple, surfacing in the waters around Santorini battered, exhausted, but alive. She survives not through luck but through the same combination of physical ability and tactical thinking that has kept her alive through dozens of equally dangerous situations. She returns to the surface with nothing but the knowledge of what she has seen and what has been taken. The orb is gone, Chunlo has vanished, and the temple will soon sink back beneath the surface as the earthquake's effects subside. Lara returns to England to regroup, to think, and to try and understand what she has discovered and why someone wanted that orb badly enough to send armed mercenaries into a submerged ancient temple to retrieve it. Back at Croft Manor, Lara begins to research the temple and the orb using her vast personal library and the considerable resources available to her through her inherited wealth and her network of academic contacts. She is a woman of exceptional intellect, and her knowledge of ancient history, mythology, and archaeology allows her to begin piecing together the significance of what she has encountered. The temple, she understands, is connected to one of the oldest and most powerful stories in all of Greek mythology. It is connected to Pandora's box. In classical mythology, Pandora's box is a container given to the first woman on earth by the god Zeus, filled with all the evils of the world, evils that were released when Pandora opened the box out of curiosity, leaving only hope trapped inside. It is a story that most people know in its simplified, fairy tale form. But Lara's understanding of the mythology goes much deeper. She understands that the ancient Greeks were not simply making up stories. They were encoding real knowledge, real warnings, real history within the framework of narrative mythology. The box, in her interpretation, is real. It exists. And whatever is inside it is not metaphorical evil but something literal and catastrophic, something that the ancient world understood to be so dangerous that it had to be hidden at the very origin point of human civilization, a place known in the mythology as the Cradle of Life. Before Lara can fully process everything she has discovered, she is contacted by representatives of MI6, the British Secret Intelligence Service. The intelligence community has been monitoring the situation around the orb and the submerged temple with great concern. They already know about Chunlo and they already know who hired him. The man who sent Chunlo to retrieve the orb is a figure known to intelligence agencies around the world as one of the most dangerous and elusive bioterrorists on Earth. His name is Dr. Jonathan Rice. He is a former Nobel Prize-winning scientist who was once celebrated for his contributions to medical research before his moral compass collapsed entirely. He abandoned legitimate science and turned his extraordinary intellect toward the development and sale of biological weapons. He is meticulous, brilliant, utterly without conscience, and extraordinarily difficult to locate or apprehend. MI6 has been trying to bring him down for years without success. What makes Rice particularly dangerous in this specific situation is what he wants the orb for. Rice has determined, through his own research, that Pandora's box is real. But his interpretation of the box differs fundamentally from the mythological one. He believes, based on evidence he has gathered through his scientific and historical research, that Pandora's box is not a container of metaphysical evils but a biological weapon, an ancient plague of devastating potency, sealed and preserved for thousands of years in the most remote and inaccessible location on Earth. If such a plague were to be released into the modern world, a world whose immune systems have no experience with or defense against it, the results would be extinction level. Every human being on the planet would be vulnerable. Rice intends to find the box, extract its contents, and sell the plague to whoever will pay the most for the ability to threaten. MI6 needs someone who can find the orb, track Chunlo, and ultimately locate Pandora's box before Rice does. They need someone with the archaeological knowledge to interpret ancient clues, the physical ability to operate in extremely dangerous environments, and the experience working outside the boundaries of conventional law enforcement. They need Lara Croft. They come to her with a proposition. She is already involved, having been at the temple in Santorini when the orb was taken. She already understands what is at stake. They ask her to take on the mission officially, with MI6 backing and resources, to find the orb, track down Chen-Lo, and stop Rice from obtaining Pandora's box. Lara agrees to help, but she has a condition of her own, one that MI6 finds deeply uncomfortable. She tells them she will need a specific partner for this mission, someone with unique knowledge of the criminal underworld that she will be navigating, someone with connections and operational experience that no legitimate intelligence operative can match. That person is Terry Sheridan. Terry is a former Royal Marine Commando, a soldier of exceptional skill and training who served his country with distinction before everything went wrong. He betrayed his unit during an operation, a betrayal that had lethal consequences for his fellow soldiers, and he was subsequently convicted of treason and imprisoned. The relationship between Lara and Terry is immediately established as complicated in ways that go far beyond professional disagreement. They have a history together, a personal and intimate one. At some point before the events of the film, Lara and Terry were involved with each other. She cared about him, perhaps deeply, and his betrayal of his unit and his country was therefore not only a professional and moral outrage but a personal one. She trusted him, and people who betray their unit are, in Lara's moral framework, the worst kind of person. She does not like him. She does not trust him. She finds his continued existence somewhere between exasperating and painful. And yet she also knows, with the cold pragmatism that defines her when she is working, that he is the right tool for this specific job. She needs what he knows and what he can do, and so she will use him, keep him at a careful distance, and deal with whatever emotional complexity that arrangement creates. MI6 arranges Terry's release into Lara's custody, and the two of them begin their journey together with a palpable and mutual tension. Terry, for his part, is charming in the specific way that dangerous and unreliable people often are, aware of his own appeal and using it without apology. He has not changed in the fundamental ways that matter most, and Lara knows this, which is why she watches him with a careful and measuring eye even as they work side by side. He is good at what he does, which makes him valuable. He is also fundamentally untrustworthy, which makes him dangerous. Their investigation takes them to Hong Kong first, where they use Terry's underworld connections to locate Chen-Lo and his organization. Chen-Lo operates out of China, and tracking him requires moving through environments that are entirely outside the reach of official intelligence channels. This is precisely why Terry is necessary. He knows the people and the places that no MI6 operative could access without immediately compromising the mission. Together, Lara and Terry navigate the criminal networks of Hong Kong and eventually track Chen-Lo to Shanghai. The confrontation with Chen-Lo in Shanghai produces one of the film's most spectacular and visually stunning action sequences. Lara pursues Chen-Lo and his men through the streets and across the rooftops of the city, the chase escalating in scale and danger with every minute. She is on a motorcycle, weaving through traffic and launching herself across impossible gaps, driven by the singular focus of someone who knows exactly what is at stake and has no intention of failing. Chen-Lo is fast and resourceful, and his men provide a constant and deadly obstacle. But Lara is faster and smarter, and the chase ends with her recovering the orb from Chen-Lo's possession. It is a triumph, but a temporary and partial one, because the larger problem, Rice and his ambitions, remains entirely unresolved. What makes this situation more dangerous is what happens to Chen-Lo very shortly after Lara recovers the orb. Dr. Rice, monitoring the situation through his own network, realizes that Chen-Lo has failed in his assignment, and that the orb has been taken. Rice responds with icy efficiency. He has Chen-Lo eliminated. The murder is swift and cold, a simple act of housekeeping by a man for whom human life has no inherent value. The killing tells Lara and MI6 everything they need to know about who they are dealing with. Rice does not leave loose ends. He does not negotiate. He does not hesitate. He is a man operating entirely outside the boundaries of human conscience. With the orb in her possession, Lara turns her full intellectual attention to understanding what it is and what it does. She studies it with the kind of obsessive focus that has always characterized her at her best, bringing together her knowledge of Greek mythology, ancient astronomy, ancient geography, and archaeological theory to decode its purpose. She eventually makes the critical discovery. The orb is not simply an artifact or a sacred object. It is a navigation device, extraordinarily sophisticated in its design and conception, built by the ancient world to guide a specific person to the location of the Cradle of Life. When exposed to direct moonlight, the orb projects a star map onto whatever surface surrounds it. The star map is not a random configuration of stars but a precise and intentional navigational chart that, when cross-referenced with ancient geographical records and historical accounts of the movements of the earliest human civilizations, points to a specific location in Africa. Africa. The continent that modern science has established as the cradle of human life, the place where the earliest human beings evolved and from which all subsequent human migration across the planet originated. The ancient mythological understanding of the cradle of life and the modern scientific understanding of human origins point to the same place, and Lara finds the convergence both profound and deeply unsettling. Whatever Pandora's box contains has been hidden at the most significant and sacred location on Earth, placed there deliberately by whoever built the original civilization that the Greek myths remember and honor. Lara and Terry prepare to travel to Africa, but Rice is already moving. He has been tracking Lara with patience and intelligence, understanding that the person most likely to successfully locate the Cradle of Life is Lara Croft, and that the most efficient approach to finding it himself is simply to follow her there and take what she finds. He has resources, he has operatives, and he has time. He does not rush. He waits and watches and prepares to act at the moment of maximum advantage. The journey into Africa takes Lara and Terry into one of the most remote and visually breathtaking environments on Earth. The African landscape, vast and ancient and alive with a sense of deep geological time, provides the backdrop for the final act of the film. Using the orb and the knowledge she has accumulated, Lara navigates toward the location indicated by the star map, moving deeper and deeper into terrain that becomes more difficult and more isolated with every mile. The natural world around them is extraordinary in its scale and its beauty, but it is also indifferent to human life in the way that truly wild places always are. They find it. The entrance to the Cradle of Life is hidden within the African landscape in a way that makes it nearly impossible to find without the orb as a guide. It is not a structure that announces itself but one that conceals itself, designed by ancient hands to remain invisible to anyone who does not already know exactly where to look. The entrance leads down into the earth, into a subterranean world of staggering scale and otherworldly beauty. The underground environment is unlike anything Lara has encountered in all her years of exploration. It is vast, lit by natural phenomena that give it an eerie and luminous quality, and it has clearly been untouched since whatever ancient civilization created it last walked through its passages. They navigate the underground passages and chambers, following the logic of the ancient architecture and the guidance of the orb, going deeper and deeper into the earth until they reach the heart of the Cradle of Life. And there, in a place that feels like the beginning of the world, they find Pandora's box. It is exactly where the ancient myths and the orb said it would be, waiting with perfect patience in the darkness where it was placed so long ago. Lara looks at it with a mixture of triumph and dread. She has found the thing she was looking for, but finding it has also brought her to the most dangerous moment of her life. Rice arrives. He has followed them precisely as Lara feared he might, tracking them through Africa and down into the earth, waiting for the moment when they would do the difficult work of finding the box before moving to take it. He comes with armed men, and the confrontation inside the Cradle of Life is immediate and violent. The underground environment makes the fight even more dangerous than it would otherwise be, the ancient chambers offering limited space, and the abyss at the heart of the cradle offering a very final consequence for anyone who falls. And then the situation becomes even more complicated, in the way that Lara had always known it might when she agreed to bring Terry along on this mission. Terry, who has been unpredictable and morally unreliable from the moment he was released from prison, makes a choice in the chaos of the confrontation that reveals exactly what kind of man he ultimately is. He has his own calculations, his own interests, and when the moment of decision comes, he does not choose Lara, does not choose the right thing, does not choose the safety of the world over his own advantage. Lara has known this moment was possible. She has been watching for it since the day they left England together, measuring Terry against his history, accounting for his capacity for betrayal and her contingency planning. But knowing something is possible does not make it painless when it happens. She is not a machine. She had history with this man, she had feelings for him once, and the person who stands before her making the worst possible choice is someone she once trusted and perhaps once loved. None of that changes what she has to do. She kills him. The act is swift and decisive and devastating, because Lara Croft is never reckless with violence, and she understands exactly what she has done. She has killed someone she once cared about because the alternative was allowing billions of people to die. It is the most consequential moral choice the film gives her, and the weight of it is visible in every frame of the scene that surrounds it. With Rice still a threat and the box still in the cradle, Lara faces her final decision. She cannot let the box leave this place. She cannot allow Rice to take it, and she cannot take it herself, because a weapon of this nature is too dangerous to exist anywhere in the world where human hands can reach it. The only responsible choice is the permanent one. She sends Pandora's box over the edge and into the abyss at the center of the Cradle of Life. It falls away into the darkness, into a depth from which nothing could be retrieved, returned to the earth that hid it for millennia. The threat is ended. The plague that Rice wanted to sell to the highest bidder is gone forever. Rice himself is dealt with in the chaos of the final confrontation, his ambitions and his life both concluded in the same underground darkness. Lara returns from Africa. She has saved the world, as she has done before and will likely do again. But this time the cost is different. This time the mission has taken something personal from her, not just the physical toll of the adventure but an emotional one, the choice she had to make in those final moments underground, the face of someone she once knew looking back at her with the knowledge of what was coming. She carries that weight home with her, across the ocean and back to England, back to Croft Manor with its vast rooms and its long history, and its permanent sense of being both home and sanctuary. The film ends quietly, with Lara back in the world she knows, competent and composed and carrying the particular kind of solitude that comes from living a life that very few people can understand or share. She has protected the world from a catastrophe that the world will never know was coming, as she has done before and will do again. The mission is complete. The box is gone. And Lara Croft is already thinking about whatever comes next. Here is the complete life history of the main actors from Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life in lengthy detail. Angelina Jolie. Angelina Jolie Voigt was born on June 4, 1975, in Los Angeles, California. She was born into a world that was already deeply connected to Hollywood, being the daughter of Jan de Bont, a celebrated Academy Award-winning actor, and Marc-Hélène Bertrand, a French-Canadian actress who gave up her own career aspirations largely to raise her children. From the very beginning, Angelina's life was shaped by the world of performance and creative expression, but it was also marked by instability and emotional difficulty in ways that would define much of her early journey. Her parents separated when she was just 1 year old and divorced when she was 2, leaving Marc-Hélène to raise Angelina and her older brother James Haven largely on her own. Jan de Bont was an absent presence during much of Angelina's childhood, a fact that created a complicated, and at times deeply painful dynamic between father and daughter that would play out publicly over the years. Helen relocated with her children from Los Angeles to New York for a period before eventually returning to the West Coast. Angelina grew up moving between environments, developing the kind of adaptability and internal self-reliance that would later serve her extraordinarily well in her career. She was enrolled in the Lee Strasberg Theatre Institute in New York at the age of 11, where she began her formal acting training. Even as a young student, those around her recognized something unusual in her, an intensity and a raw emotional availability that set her apart from her peers. She was not simply talented in the technical sense. She had access to a depth of feeling that most young actors spend decades trying to find. She studied at the Institute for several years before returning to Los Angeles and beginning to pursue professional work seriously. Her teenage years were turbulent by her own account. She has spoken openly in various interviews over the years about struggling with depression, a sense of disconnection from the world around her, and a period of emotional darkness that she found genuinely difficult to navigate. She collected knives during her adolescence, found herself drawn to things that other people found unsettling, and felt profoundly out of place in the conventional social world of her peers. She has described herself as a misfit during those years, someone who did not fit neatly into any of the categories that the world around her seemed to expect. She began appearing in small roles in the early 1990s, including appearances in music videos and low-budget productions, while she was still developing her craft and finding her footing as a professional performer. Her feature film career began to take shape in the mid-1990s with a series of roles that demonstrated her range and her willingness to commit completely to difficult material. She appeared in Hackers in 1995, a film that gave her a notable early showcase and introduced her to a wider audience. She appeared in Without Evidence, and then took on the role of supermodel Gia Karangi in the 1998 HBO television film Gia, a performance that announced to anyone who was paying attention that this was a performer of extraordinary capability and fearlessness. Her work in Gia earned her a Golden Globe Award and demonstrated that she was willing to go to places emotionally and physically that many actors of her generation would not. The role required her to portray addiction, physical deterioration, and the tragic arc of a brilliant and self-destructive life with complete honesty, and she did so without the kind of protective distance that lesser actors sometimes maintain between themselves and their most demanding material. The role that changed everything, however, was her portrayal of the volatile and charismatic Lisa Rowan Girl, Interrupted, the 1999 film based on Susanna Kayson's memoir about her time in a psychiatric institution. Jolie played the role opposite Winona Ryder, who was technically the lead of the film, and proceeded to create a performance so vivid and so magnetic that it threatened to shift the center of gravity of the entire movie every time she appeared on screen. Lisa Rowe is dangerous and brilliant, and deeply damaged, and Jolie played her with an energy that was simultaneously frightening and seductive. The performance won her the Academy Award for Best Supporting Actress, the Screen Actors Guild Award, the Golden Globe Award, and essentially every other major recognition available to her. She was 24 years old. What followed was one of the most remarkable sustained runs in Hollywood history. She became one of the highest paid and most sought-after actresses in the industry with remarkable speed, and she demonstrated her range by moving between genres with apparent ease. She took on action roles, dramatic roles, thriller roles, and science fiction roles with equal commitment and equal skill. Her personal life during this period was also intensely public and occasionally sensational. Her marriage to actor Johnny Lee Miller, whom she had met on the set of Hackers, lasted from 1996 to 1999. Her subsequent marriage to actor Billy Bob Thornton, whom she met on the set of Pushing Tin, was one of the most written about celebrity relationships of its era, marked by an intensity and an unconventionality that fascinated and sometimes baffled observers. That marriage lasted from 2000 to 2003. The Tomb Raider films represented a significant shift in her career, moving her firmly into the territory of blockbuster action cinema and establishing her as a genuine box office draw in that genre. the first Tomb Raider film, released in 2001, was a massive commercial success, and her physicality and presence in the role were widely praised. She trained extensively for the role, developed real competence with weapons and martial arts, and threw herself into the physical demands of the production with the same completeness she brought to her dramatic work. Her personal life took another profound turn during the filming of Mr. and Mrs. Smith in 2004, when she began a relationship with co-star Brad Pitt. Pitt was married to actress Jennifer Aniston at the time, and the circumstances of the beginning of his relationship with Jolie generated enormous public controversy that followed both of them for years. The couple went on to adopt 3 children, Maddox from Cambodia, Zahara from Ethiopia, and Pax from Vietnam, and to have 3 biological children together, Shiloh, and the twins Knox and Vivian. Their relationship, which was one of the most discussed in the world for over a decade, ultimately ended with their separation in 2016 and a subsequent and highly publicized legal process. Beyond her acting career, Jolie became one of the most prominent humanitarian figures in the world during the 2000s and 2010s. She became a Goodwill Ambassador for the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees in 2001 and subsequently undertook missions to refugee camps and conflict zones across Africa, Asia, and the Middle East. She elevated global attention on issues of displacement, poverty, and the human cost of war in ways that few celebrities have managed to do with equal sincerity and sustained commitment. She was eventually elevated to the rank of Special Envoy of the UNHCR, a recognition of the depth and seriousness of her humanitarian work over many years. She also directed several films, including In the Land of Blood and Honey in 2011, Unbroken in 2014, By the Sea in 2015, and First They Killed My Father in 2017, a Cambodian-language film about the Khmer Rouge genocide that was submitted as Cambodia's official entry for the Academy Award for Best Foreign Language Film. Her health became a significant public topic in 2013 when she wrote an extraordinarily candid opinion piece for the New York Times in which she disclosed that she had undergone a preventive double mastectomy after testing positive for a BRCA1 gene mutation that gave her a very high statistical likelihood of developing breast cancer. The piece, which she wrote with characteristic directness and without sentimentality, sparked a worldwide conversation about genetic testing, preventive medicine, and the decisions women face when confronting inherited health risks. She subsequently underwent a preventive removal of her ovaries and fallopian tubes. Gerard Butler. Gerard James Butler was born on November 13, 1969, in Paisley, Scotland, a town in the Renfrewshire Council area near Glasgow. His early life was shaped by circumstances that were both difficult and formative in ways that would take years to fully understand. His parents, Edward and Margaret Butler, separated when Gerard was very young, and his mother took the children to live in Canada for a period before returning to Scotland when Gerard was around 6 years old. The experience of early family disruption and the sense of being uprooted from one place to another became a foundational part of his emotional landscape. Growing up in Scotland, Butler was by his own description a somewhat rebellious and unfocused young man who was more interested in having a good time than in applying himself to anything in particular. He was intelligent enough to perform well academically when he chose to, and he eventually gained entry to the University of Glasgow, where he studied law. He was elected president of the Glasgow University Law Society, which suggests he had both the charisma and the organizational capability to succeed in a conventional professional career. He completed his law degree and secured a position as a trainee solicitor at a law firm in Edinburgh, moving into the city to begin what looked from the outside like a thoroughly conventional professional path, but something fundamental was not working. Butler has spoken in interviews about the period during his early legal career as one of significant personal difficulty, marked by heavy drinking and a growing sense that he was living a life that was not genuinely his own. He had not chosen law out of passion but out of a vague sense of practicality and social expectation, and the mismatch between the life he was living and the person he felt himself to be was creating a kind of internal pressure that expressed itself in increasingly self-destructive behavior. He was dismissed from his trainee solicitor position just 1 week before he was due to qualify as a fully certified lawyer, an event that was simultaneously a humiliation and, in retrospect, a liberation. In the aftermath of that dismissal, Butler made a decision that seemed reckless from the outside but was almost certainly the most authentic choice he had ever made. He decided to pursue acting. He had no formal training, no contacts in the industry, and no particular basis for believing he could succeed. What he had was an instinct, a desire, and the kind of stubbornness that can sometimes look indistinguishable from courage. He moved to London and began doing whatever work he could find, taking small roles in theatre and television, while slowly building the experience and the connections that a professional career requires. His early years in the industry were genuinely difficult. He was working in a competitive field without the advantages of formal training or established relationships, and progress was slow and often discouraging. He persisted because the alternative, returning to law or to some other conventional career path, was something he could not bring himself to seriously consider. He had made his choice, and he was committed to following it wherever it led. His breakthrough came in a way that was both unexpected and perfectly suited to his particular qualities as a performer. He was cast as the iconic vampire Dracula in the 2000 film Dracula 2000, a horror action film that was not critically celebrated but that gave him a significant platform and demonstrated that he had the screen presence and physical authority to carry a major role. Casting directors and producers began to pay closer attention. His role as Terry Sheridan in Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life came in 2003 and placed him alongside Angelina Jolie in a major Hollywood production. The role required him to project a very specific kind of dangerous charm, a person who is simultaneously appealing and unreliable, someone whose surface attractiveness conceals a fundamental moral weakness. Butler played it with considerable sophistication, creating a character who feels genuinely complicated rather than simply villainous, and his chemistry with Jolie gave the film an emotional texture that its action sequences alone could not have provided. But the role that transformed his career entirely, and made him a genuine global star came in 2006, when he was cast as King Leonidas of Sparta in Zack Snyder's 300. The film, based on Frank Miller's graphic novel about the Battle of Thermopylae, required Butler to undergo a physical transformation that was almost brutal in its demands. He trained obsessively for months to achieve the physical condition that the role required, working with trainers in a program that was by all accounts extraordinarily demanding. The result was a physical performance of extraordinary impact, and his delivery of the film's most famous line became one of the most quoted and referenced moments in popular cinema of the 2000s. The film was a massive global phenomenon, and Butler was at the center of it. What followed 300 was a career defined by considerable range and occasional unpredictability. He demonstrated genuine comic ability and romantic appeal in films like The Ugly Truth and The Bounty Hunter, moved into disaster action territory with films like Geostorm, and maintained his action credentials with the Has Fallen franchise, beginning with Olympus Has Fallen in 2013 and continuing through London Has Fallen and Angel Has Fallen. His personal life has been the subject of public interest over the years, with various reported relationships generating media attention. He has spoken openly about his battles with substance abuse and addiction, acknowledging a period of dependency on painkillers that he addressed through rehabilitation. His honesty about those struggles has been widely respected and has made him a figure that people find genuinely relatable despite his star status. Ciarán Hinds. Ciarán Hinds was born on February 9, 1953, in Belfast, Northern Ireland, into a family that had its roots firmly in the working-class fabric of that city. Growing up in Belfast during the mid-20th century meant growing up in a place defined by complex political, religious, and social tensions that would eventually erupt into the period known as the Troubles. The city's particular atmosphere, simultaneously warm in its community bonds and charged with the underlying. He studied at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London, one of the most prestigious theatrical training institutions in the world, where he developed the rigorous technical foundation that has supported one of the most quietly remarkable careers in contemporary performance. RADA is an institution that emphasizes discipline, craft, and the full breadth of dramatic tradition, and Hines absorbed those lessons thoroughly. He graduated from RADA with the tools to work across every form of the dramatic arts, from classical theater to contemporary film and television. His career began in theater, where he spent years working on stage in productions that ranged across the full scope of the dramatic canon. He was part of the generation of classically trained British and Irish actors who built their craft on the stage before transitioning to film and television, and his theatrical background is visible in the authority and precision he brings to every role he takes on, regardless of the medium. He worked extensively with prestigious theater companies and developed a reputation. His film and television career grew steadily through the 1990s and into the 2000s, with a series of roles that demonstrated his extraordinary range. He played Julius Caesar in the HBO and BBC co-production Rome, a role that required him to portray one of history's most complex and consequential figures with both grandeur and human vulnerability. He was extraordinary in the role, bringing to Caesar an intelligence and a sense of absolute authority that felt entirely authentic without ever tipping into caricature. The performance, his role as Dr. Jonathan Rice in The Cradle of Life allowed him to bring his considerable stage-trained authority to a major Hollywood villain, and he did so with characteristic understatement and intelligence. He plays Rice not as a screaming, theatrical antagonist but as a man of absolute and terrifying calm, someone whose danger comes from his intelligence and his complete absence of moral constraint rather than from any explosive or unpredictable emotionality. It is a more unsettling portrayal than a more conventionally theatrical villain would have been. He has worked with some of the most acclaimed directors in contemporary cinema, appearing in films by Steven Spielberg, John Madden, and others. He is particularly known to contemporary audiences for his role as Mance Rayder, the King Beyond the Wall, in the HBO fantasy series Game of Thrones, a role that required him to project both the charisma of a leader who commands the loyalty of wildly different peoples and the underlying weariness of a man who has been fighting for a very long time. He joined the Marvel Cinematic Universe as Yon-Rog's superior supreme intelligence in Captain Marvel, further expanding his reach into blockbuster entertainment. His career stands as a model of sustained excellence and intelligent career management, built entirely on the quality of his work rather than on personal celebrity or controversy. Til Schweiger. Til Schweiger was born on December 19, 1963, in Freiburg im Breisgau, a city in the Baden-Württemberg state of southwestern Germany. He grew up in West Germany during the Cold War era, in a country still navigating its complex relationship with its own 20th-century history and in the process of building the modern democratic identity that the Federal Republic of Germany had been constructing since 1949. He studied acting at the Hochschule für Musik und Theater Hamburg, a respected German performing arts institution, where he developed his craft in the European theatrical tradition. His early career was built in German theater and television, where he became one of the most recognized and commercially successful figures in the German entertainment industry. His television work in Germany made him a household name in his home country long before international audiences had any awareness of him. His breakthrough in German cinema came with his role in the film Der Bewegte Mann in 1994, which became one of the most commercially successful German films of its era. He then took a step that was both courageous and genuinely risky for a performer of his established domestic standing. He decided to pursue an international career in Hollywood, moving to the United States and attempting to transition from German-language stardom to English-language film work. The transition was not easy. He spoke English but was not a native speaker, and breaking into American film from the outside is genuinely difficult for anyone, regardless of their standing in their home industry. He secured roles in several Hollywood productions through the late 1990s and into the 2000s, including his appearance in The Cradle of Life, which placed him in a major international blockbuster alongside one of Hollywood's biggest stars. His physical presence and his ability to project controlled menace made him effective in villain-adjacent roles, and he carved out a niche in that territory within international productions. Ultimately, Schweiger returned his primary professional attention to Germany, where he built one of the most successful careers in the contemporary German film industry. He became not only an actor but a writer, director, and producer of significant commercial success, creating a series of popular German films that demonstrated his considerable abilities across multiple aspects of filmmaking. He has become one of the most beloved and prominent figures in German popular cinema, and his decision to return to his home industry rather than continuing to chase Hollywood success is widely regarded as one of the best professional decisions he ever made. Simon Yam. Simon Yam Tat Wall was born on March 19, 1957, in Hong Kong, when the city was still a British Crown colony navigating the particular pressures and opportunities of its unique position between East and West. Hong Kong during the 1950s and 1960s was a city in the process of remarkable transformation, evolving from a colonial trading port into one of the great commercial and cultural cities of Asia, and the energy and dynamism of that transformation shaped everyone who grew up there during those decades. He began his career in the Hong Kong entertainment industry in the early 1980s, a period when Hong Kong's cinema was experiencing one of the most extraordinary creative explosions in the history of world film. The Hong Kong film industry of that era was producing a body of work that was influencing filmmakers around the world, developing action cinema, comedy, drama, and genre filmmaking in ways that were entirely distinctive and extraordinarily creative. Simon Yam built his career in the middle of this remarkable era. He became one of the most prolific and versatile performers in Hong Kong film history, appearing in an extraordinary number of productions across every conceivable genre. He worked with the great directors of Hong Kong cinema, including John Woo and Johnny To, and appeared in films that are now recognized as classics of Asian cinema. His range is exceptional. He has played police officers, criminals, romantic leads, comedic characters, and villains with equal facility, and his ability to disappear into wildly different characters while maintaining an unmistakable screen presence is one of the defining qualities of his work. His appearance in The Cradle of Life represented a crossover into major Hollywood production, and while his role as Chun Lo was not a large one in terms of screen time, his presence brought an authenticity and a genuine star quality to the Hong Kong sequences of the film. For Western audiences unfamiliar with his enormous body of work, he was simply a compelling screen presence. For audiences familiar with Hong Kong cinema, his appearance was recognition of a figure whose contribution to Asian film is truly remarkable. He has continued to be one of the most active and respected performers in Hong Kong and Chinese cinema in the decades since The Cradle of Life, and his career remains a testament to the extraordinary talent that the Hong Kong film industry produced during its golden age and the decades that followed. The making of the film and its budget. Lara Croft Tomb Raider, The Cradle of Life was produced with an official production budget of approximately $95 million, making it one of the more expensively produced action films of its era. When you factor in the cost of global marketing, international distribution, print costs, and the enormous promotional campaign that Paramount Pictures mounted around the film's release in the summer of 2003, the total financial investment in the project was considerably higher, with some estimates placing the all-in cost at well over $150 million. This was a serious financial undertaking by any measure, and the pressure to deliver a film that could perform at the international box office was significant from the very first day of pre-production. The decision to replace the original film's director, Simon West, with Jan de Bont was made early in the development process. De Bont was brought in specifically because of his reputation for delivering large-scale, visually spectacular action cinema on schedule and within budget. His work on Speed had demonstrated that he understood how to construct action sequences that were both technically impressive and genuinely tense, and the producers believed he was the right person to take the Tomb Raider franchise in a bigger and more ambitious direction. De Bont immediately pushed for a more grounded and geographically authentic approach to the story, arguing that the film should feel like a real-world adventure rather than a purely fantastical one. This commitment to shooting in real locations rather than relying on studio sets and green screen work was one of the single biggest drivers of the film's budget. The production traveled to 5 different countries to capture the film's various settings. The opening underwater sequences were filmed in the Bahamas rather than in a studio tank, because de Bont wanted the natural underwater environment to give those scenes a visual texture and authenticity that simply cannot be replicated in a controlled tank setting. Shooting underwater in real ocean conditions is exponentially more expensive and complicated than shooting in a tank. The unpredictability of the natural environment, the challenges of controlling lighting beneath the surface of the sea, the specialized equipment required for deep water cinematography, and the logistical demands of keeping a large production crew safe and functional in that environment all contribute to costs that escalate rapidly. The underwater sequences alone consumed a significant portion of the production schedule and resources. The Hong Kong sequences were filmed on location in the city itself, which required extensive coordination with local authorities and the management of enormous logistical challenges associated with shooting large-scale action sequences in one of the most densely populated urban environments on Earth. The Shanghai motorcycle chase sequence, which is one of the film's most celebrated set pieces, required the production to work with local partners to manage road closures, crowd control, and the integration of the film's stunt performers and camera operators into a real urban environment. The choreography of that chase sequence alone took weeks of planning and rehearsal before a single frame was shot. The African sequences were filmed in Kenya and Zimbabwe, where the production set up base camps in remote locations in order to capture the authentic landscape that the film's climax required. Transporting cast, crew, equipment, and all of the logistical infrastructure of a major Hollywood production to remote locations in East Africa is an undertaking of considerable complexity and cost. The production had to manage not only the financial aspects of this but also the practical challenges of working in environments where the supply chains for specialist equipment and the availability of skilled local crew members were fundamentally different from what a Hollywood production would encounter in Los Angeles or London. Significant portions of the film were also shot in the United Kingdom, primarily in and around London and at various country estates that doubled for Croft Manor and its grounds. The UK production was managed partly through established British production infrastructure and partly through Angelina Jolie's own requirements for the role, which included extensive training and preparation work that the production had to accommodate, and the film employed several hundred crew members across its various international shooting locations, and the costs associated with international travel, accommodation, per diem payments, and location management for a crew of that size accumulate into figures that are genuinely staggering when calculated across the full length of a production that ran for months. The visual effects work, which was handled by several different specialist studios, added another substantial layer of cost to the overall budget. The shark sequence, the glowing orb effects, the underground Cradle of Life environment, and various the costume and prop departments were working at the highest level of their craft. Lara Croft's iconic look required collaboration between the costume designers and Jolie herself, and the various practical props used throughout the film, including the orb, the ancient artifacts encountered in the temple, and the weapons and equipment used by the cast throughout the production, were all created by specialist prop makers to a very high standard. The orb in particular went through numerous design iterations before the production settled on the final version seen in the film, because it needed to be both visually striking enough to anchor the film's central mystery and practical enough to be handled by performers in physically demanding action sequences. Angelina Jolie's preparation for the role was intensive and expensive to support. She worked with martial arts trainers, weapons specialists, and fitness coaches to maintain and develop the physical capabilities required for the role. She trained in various martial arts disciplines and spent considerable time familiarizing herself with the specific weapons and equipment her character uses throughout the film. The production supported all of this preparation as a necessary investment in the authenticity of the performance. Funny and light-hearted moments from the set. Despite the serious scale and enormous financial pressure of the production, the set of the Cradle of Life was, by all accounts from cast and crew members who have Angelina Jolie, despite her reputation as an intensely focused and serious professional, was apparently a significant source of laughter and levity on set. Those who worked with her on both Tomb Raider films have described her as someone who is deeply committed to her craft, but who also possesses a genuinely mischievous sense of humor that emerges when the cameras are not rolling. She was known for playing pranks on crew members and for maintaining an atmosphere of warmth and approachability that made working on the production feel collaborative rather than hierarchical. She would reportedly show up to the set between takes in the most elaborate and uncomfortable stunt rigging, having been hoisted into some improbable position. The underwater sequences in the Bahamas produced what are, by all accounts, some of the most genuinely comedic moments of the entire production, though they were not necessarily funny in the moment. Working underwater at significant depth, in heavy costumes and equipment, with limited communication between the performers and the surface crew, creates conditions that are inherently chaotic and unpredictable in ways that no amount of planning can entirely prevent. Action sequences that look fluid and effortless on screen frequently require dozens of takes underwater, which means that performers spend enormous amounts of time in diving equipment doing things that, from a certain perspective, look absolutely ridiculous. The shark sequences created particular moments of chaotic comedy. Working with real sharks, even in conditions where their behavior is managed by specialist animal handlers, is inherently unpredictable, and the gap between what the scene requires the shark to do and what the shark actually chooses to do in any given moment can be wide and occasionally hilarious. There were numerous takes during those sequences where the shark showed absolutely no interest in the script's requirements, and simply swam calmly in whatever direction it found most appealing, entirely ignoring the carefully choreographed positions that the sequence demanded. The stunt coordinators responsible for managing those sequences have. Gerard Butler was apparently an enormous source of entertainment on set, primarily because his natural Scottish personality was so fundamentally different from the controlled and morally ambiguous character he was playing. Terry Sheridan is a man of careful calculation and dangerous charm. Gerard Butler off-camera is, by all accounts, a man of enormous and immediate personal warmth, considerable volume, and a deeply enthusiastic sense of humor that has very little in common with his character's cold and strategic personality. The distance between who Butler actually is and who Terry Sheridan is apparently created numerous amusing moments during shooting, particularly when he would break from a scene of intense dramatic tension and his chemistry with Jolie, which reads on screen as genuine and complicated in exactly the right ways for the story, was apparently developed through a working relationship that was considerably more relaxed and good-humored than the finished film would suggest. They enjoyed each other's company and found the process of building the dynamic between their characters to be both creatively engaging and genuinely enjoyable. Butler has spoken in various interviews about his time on the production with obvious warmth, and the affection he has for the experience is clear even years later when he discusses it. The scenes set in and around Croft Manor, which featured Chris Berry as the long-suffering butler Hillary and Noah Taylor as the eccentric tech specialist Bryce, were apparently particular sources of entertainment during production. Berry, who is most famous in the United Kingdom for his work in the comedy series Red Dwarf and the British Empire, is a performer with a natural gift for comic timing and physical comedy, and he brought those qualities to the set in ways that regularly broke up the otherwise serious atmosphere of a large and expensive action production. His and Taylor's natural comedic instincts, combined with the inherently funny premise of two wildly different personalities trying to support one of the world's most dangerous adventurers from the relative safety of an English country house, made their scenes together enjoyable to shoot in ways that are visible in the warmth of their finished performances. The Africa sequences brought their own particular category of unexpected comedy, rooted in the practical challenges of filming in genuinely remote wilderness environments. Large film productions in remote international locations inevitably encounter the gap between what is planned in air-conditioned production offices and what is actually possible in the field, and the African shoot produced numerous examples of this gap manifesting in ways that were simultaneously frustrating and hilarious. Equipment that performed perfectly in testing conditions in Los Angeles would behave in entirely unexpected ways in the heat and dust of the African bush. Vehicles intended to move the production between locations would choose inconvenient moments to demonstrate their limitations. Wildlife, indifferent to the needs of a major Hollywood production, would wander through carefully prepared shots at the worst possible moments, requiring everything to stop and the shot to be reset. Jan de Bont, the director, was apparently a figure of considerable energy and enthusiasm throughout the production, and his commitment to the project was such that he could be found in the most improbable locations at the most unexpected times, personally checking camera angles in underwater rigs or standing in the middle of a Hong Kong street at 3 a.m. ensuring that the lighting was exactly right for the following morning's chase sequence. His dedication, while deeply admirable, occasionally produced situations that the crew found quietly amusing, particularly when his very specific vision for a sequence encountered the very specific reality of what was actually achievable given the constraints of time, budget, and physics. The technical crew working on the glowing orb effects, which required the prop to appear to emit light in various controlled ways throughout the film, spent what has been described as an almost unreasonable amount of time trying to make a physical prop behave in exactly the way the script required. The gap between what a glowing orb does in a writer's imagination and what a physical object can actually be made to do on a film set is wider than one might expect, and the solutions that the prop department eventually arrived at involved a level of improvisation and creative problem-solving that their colleagues found both impressive and amusing. Angelina Jolie's absolute professionalism in the most uncomfortable physical situations was apparently something that the entire cast and crew found both deeply admirable and occasionally funny in a way that comes from genuine admiration. She would be suspended upside down in a stunt rig, in full costume, in the middle of a complex action sequence, and between takes she would hold a completely normal conversation with whoever was nearby as if she were simply sitting in a comfortable chair. The contrast between the objectively absurd physical situation and her complete calm within it was something that crew members have described as one of the defining and memorable qualities of working with her. Here are the complete cultural and historical details of Lara Croft Tomb Raider, the Cradle of Life in full and lengthy detail. The foundation of the story in ancient Greek mythology. The entire narrative of the Cradle of Life is built upon one of the oldest and most enduring stories in the history of human civilization, the myth of Pandora's box. To understand why this film carries the cultural and historical weight that it does, you have to first understand where that myth comes from, what it meant to the people who created it, and how it has been interpreted and reinterpreted across thousands of years of human storytelling. The myth originates in ancient Greek religious and cultural tradition, and its earliest surviving written form appears in the works of Hesiod, a Greek poet who lived and wrote sometime around the 8th century before the Common Era. Hesiod recorded the myth in two of his most important works, Theogony and Works and Days, which together constitute one of the foundational documents of ancient Greek religious understanding. In Hesiod's telling, Pandora was the first woman ever created, fashioned from earth and water by the god Hephaestus on the instructions of Zeus, the king of the gods. She was given gifts by all the gods of Olympus, gifts of beauty, grace, cunning, and persuasion, and she was sent to earth as a gift to humanity. But she carried with her a large jar, referred to in the original Greek as a pithos, which contained all the evils, diseases, sorrows, and misfortunes that would afflict humanity. When Pandora opened the jar out of curiosity, all of those evils escaped into the world, leaving only hope trapped inside when she quickly closed it again. It is worth noting that what the ancient Greeks called a pithos was actually a large storage jar, similar to the clay jars used throughout the ancient Mediterranean world for storing grain, olive oil, and wine. The translation of this vessel as a box rather than a jar is actually a mistranslation that became standardized during the Renaissance period, when the Dutch scholar Erasmus translated Hesiod's text into Latin and rendered pithos as pyxis, which means a small box or chest. This mistranslation became so embedded in Western cultural consciousness over the following centuries that it effectively replaced the original, and the image of Pandora's box rather than Pandora's jar is what has persisted in global popular culture ever since. The film works with this Renaissance-era mistranslation rather than the original Greek conception, which is itself an interesting cultural detail about how ancient stories transform as they travel through time. The myth carries profound cultural significance beyond its surface narrative. Ancient Greek mythology used stories of divine creation and human curiosity to explain the fundamental conditions of human existence. The question of why human life involves suffering, disease, aging, and death was one that every ancient culture attempted to answer through mythology, and the story of Pandora was the Greek answer to that question. The evils that escaped from the jar were not arbitrary misfortunes but the full range of human suffering, and the fact that hope remained inside was understood as the one consolation that made human existence bearable. The film takes this ancient explanatory myth and repurposes it as a thriller premise, reimagining the box not as a metaphysical container of abstract evils but as a literal biological weapon, which is a creative decision that speaks to the particular anxieties of the early 21st century rather than to ancient Greek cosmological thinking. The historical reality of Alexander the Great. The film makes significant use of Alexander the Great as a historical figure, connecting the location of the Cradle of Life to the conquests and discoveries of one of history's most extraordinary military leaders. Alexander the Great, who lived from 356 before the Common Era to 323 before the Common Era, is among the most consequential figures in the history of the ancient world, and his story carries a cultural weight that makes him an entirely appropriate historical anchor for a film built around ancient mysteries. Alexander was the son of Philip II of Macedon, a powerful king who had already unified the fractious city-states of Greece under Macedonian authority before his assassination in 336 before the Common Era left his young son in control of an extraordinarily powerful military machine. Alexander took that machine and used it to create the largest empire the ancient world had yet seen, conquering Persia, Egypt, Central Asia, and reaching as far as the northwestern regions of the Indian subcontinent before his army, exhausted and homesick after more than a decade of continuous campaigning, refused to march further east. During his campaigns, Alexander encountered cultures, civilizations, and knowledge systems that were entirely unknown to the Greek world from which he came. He traveled through regions that held the accumulated wisdom and history of civilizations far older than Greece, and he was by all historical accounts genuinely curious about the places and peoples he encountered, not merely interested in their conquests but in their knowledge and their history. His tutor had been Aristotle, the greatest philosopher and polymath of the ancient world, and Alexander absorbed from Aristotle a genuine intellectual curiosity that complemented his extraordinary gifts as a military commander. The idea that Alexander might have encountered something during his campaigns, some artifact or location connected to the deepest roots of human civilization, is historically grounded in the reality that his campaigns did take him through regions that contained some of the oldest human settlements and cultural traditions on Earth. The film uses this historical reality to anchor its fictional premise, suggesting that Alexander discovered something connected to the Cradle of Life during his travels and that the orb served as the navigation device he used or encountered during that discovery. This is entirely fictional but uses real history as scaffolding in the way that the best adventure storytelling has always done. The significance of Santorini and the Aegean civilization. The film opens in Santorini, and this choice of location carries considerable historical and cultural weight beyond its obvious visual appeal. Santorini, known in ancient times as Thera, is one of the most historically significant islands in the entire Mediterranean world. It is the site of one of the most catastrophic volcanic eruptions in recorded human history, which occurred sometime around 1600 before the Common Era and fundamentally altered the course of Bronze Age Mediterranean civilization. The Minoan civilization, which was centered on the island of Crete and had established one of the most sophisticated and culturally advanced societies in the pre-classical Mediterranean world, maintained a significant settlement on Thera called Akrotiri. This settlement was buried by the volcanic eruption in a manner remarkably similar to the later burial of Pompeii by Mount Vesuvius, and the preservation of its ruins has provided archaeologists with an extraordinary window into the daily life, architecture, art, and material culture of a Bronze Age civilization. The wall paintings found at Akrotiri are among the most beautiful and historically significant surviving examples of ancient Mediterranean art. The volcanic eruption at Thera is also connected, in the theories of some historians and archaeologists, to the legend of Atlantis, the lost civilization described by the philosopher Plato in his dialogues Timaeus and Critias. Plato described Atlantis as a powerful and advanced civilization that was destroyed and sunk beneath the ocean in a single catastrophic event, and many scholars have proposed that this description was based on folk memories of the Theran eruption and the subsequent collapse of Minoan civilization. By setting the film's opening in Santorini and using the premise of an underwater earthquake revealing a submerged ancient temple, the filmmakers are drawing on this extraordinarily rich layer of historical and mythological association in ways that give the story considerable cultural depth. The Greek world that is invoked by the film's opening is not simply a decorative backdrop, but a genuine engagement with the historical reality of how ancient Mediterranean civilizations understood their world. The Greeks built temples in locations they considered sacred, locations that often had geological or geographical significance, and the idea of an ancient sanctuary built near or even beneath the waters of the Aegean is entirely consistent with what we know about how ancient Greek religious and cultural practices were organized around the natural landscape. The concept of the Cradle of Life and Human Origins. The title of the film, The Cradle of Life, invokes one of the most profound and widely discussed concepts in modern science, the African origin of the human species. The scientific consensus, supported by an enormous body of fossil and genetic evidence accumulated over more than a century of research, is that anatomically modern humans, Homo sapiens, evolved in Africa and subsequently migrated out of the continent to populate every other region of the world. This is not a speculative theory but an established scientific understanding that has been refined and confirmed through successive generations of research in paleoanthropology, genetics, and archaeology. The term Cradle of Humankind is actually used as the official name for a World Heritage Site in South Africa, a region of remarkable paleontological significance that contains some of the most important fossil evidence of human evolutionary history ever discovered. The Sterkfontein caves within this region have yielded fossil remains of early hominins, the evolutionary relatives and ancestors of modern humans, that have been dated to millions of years ago. The cultural and scientific weight of Africa as the place where the human story began gives the film's final act a layer of significance that extends far beyond its plot mechanics. By locating the Cradle of Life, the place where Pandora's box has been hidden and where the mythological origin of human suffering is stored, in the same continental landscape where modern science locates the actual origin of the human species, the film creates an interesting convergence of mythology and science. Whether this convergence was fully intentional or represents a felicitous coincidence in the screenplay's geography is an interesting question, but the effect is to give the film's climactic setting a resonance that makes it feel genuinely appropriate in a way that a more arbitrary location would not. The African landscape itself carries profound historical and cultural meaning that the film's visual approach acknowledges, even if the narrative does not always fully engage with it. Africa is not simply a dramatic backdrop for a Western adventure story but a continent with its own extraordinarily complex and ancient history, its own civilizations, its own cultural traditions, and its own relationship with the Western world that is deeply complicated by the history of colonialism and exploitation. The use of Africa in adventure filmmaking has a long and not always entirely comfortable history, and the fact that the Cradle of Life uses the continent primarily as a spectacular setting for a story driven by Western and Greek mythological concerns is something that is worth acknowledging as part of the film's cultural context. Bioterrorism as a contemporary cultural anxiety. The villain's motivation in the Cradle of Life is not simply personal greed or a desire for power in the abstract. Dr. Rice wants Pandora's box specifically because he believes it contains an ancient biological agent that he can weaponize and sell, turning the catastrophic potential of a prehistoric plague into a commercial product for the international bioterrorism market. This specific premise did not emerge from a cultural vacuum. It reflects the particular anxieties of the period in which the film was made with considerable precision. The film was released in 2003, less than 2 years after the September 11 attacks of 2001, which fundamentally altered the way that Western governments and their populations thought about terrorism, mass casualty events, and the vulnerability of civilian populations to deliberate attacks. In the immediate aftermath of those attacks, the anthrax letter attacks of October 2001 raised the specific specter of biological terrorism in a way that had not been so viscerally present in public consciousness before. The idea that hostile actors might use biological agents as weapons of mass destruction became a prominent and genuinely frightening element of the post-September 11 security conversation, and governments around the world significantly increased their investment in biodefense research and preparedness. The character of Dr. Rice, a formerly legitimate scientist who has turned his expertise toward the development and sale of biological weapons, reflects this cultural moment with considerable accuracy. The film is using the mythology of Pandora's box, a story about the release of all the world's evils into the human world, as a metaphor for the specific contemporary fear of biological terrorism, translating an ancient narrative about the fundamental conditions of human suffering into a modern thriller about a recognizable category of contemporary danger. This is exactly what the best adventure storytelling has always done, using the imaginative framework of ancient myths and stories to explore the specific anxieties and concerns of the moment in which the storytelling is taking place. The cultural significance of Lara Croft as a female action hero. No discussion of the cultural context of the Cradle of Life can be complete without addressing what Lara Croft represented as a cultural figure at the time of the film's release, and what she continues to represent in the broader history of female representation in action cinema. The Lara Croft character was created in 1996 by Core Design, a British video game development studio, and was originally designed by Toby Gard. She was conceived as a strong, independent, physically capable female protagonist for an action-adventure video game, and her design and characterization represented something genuinely new in the landscape of mainstream gaming. The world of action cinema in 2003 was still predominantly organized around male protagonists. The list of major Hollywood blockbusters built around female action leads was short, and the examples that did exist were frequently framed in ways that emphasized the novelty or transgression of a woman occupying that space rather than simply treating female capability as a baseline assumption. Lara Croft, as portrayed by Angelina Jolie, was significant because she occupied the center of a major blockbuster action franchise without any of the apologetic framing or male validation structures that often surrounded female action characters of that era. She did not need a male partner to authorize her competence or anchor her narrative. She was the story, and everyone else in the film existed in relation to her rather than the other way around. This was culturally significant in 2003 and remains historically significant in the broader story of how action cinema has evolved in its treatment of female protagonists. The Tomb Raider films preceded by several years the more sustained conversation about female representation in blockbuster cinema that began to emerge with greater force in the 2010s. They were early and commercially successful examples of what was possible, and their influence on subsequent generations of filmmakers and audiences is a legitimate part of their cultural legacy. The character of Lara Croft also represented a specifically British cultural identity in interesting ways. She is an aristocrat, the product of inherited wealth and a privileged education, and yet she operates entirely outside the conventional expectations of that class background. She is not defined by her social position or by the gender expectations associated with it, but by her own extraordinary competence, and by a set of personal values that she pursues regardless of social convention. This combination of aristocratic heritage and radical personal independence has a specific resonance in British cultural history that the films engage with whether intentionally or not. The historical use of ancient maps and navigation devices. The orb that functions as the central MacGuffin of the film, the object that both drives the plot and contains the navigational information necessary to find the Cradle of Life, is a fictional artifact but one that draws on real historical traditions of ancient astronomical and navigational knowledge. The ancient world developed extraordinarily sophisticated astronomical understanding, and the use of star patterns for navigation is one of the oldest human technologies. The ancient Greeks in particular developed remarkable astronomical knowledge and were among the first civilizations to systematically map the night sky, identify the patterns of stars, understand the movements of the planets, and use this information for both philosophical and practical purposes. The Antikythera mechanism, an ancient Greek device discovered in a shipwreck near the island of Antikythera in 1900 and subsequently dated to approximately 150 to 100 before the Common Era, is the most famous surviving example of the mechanical sophistication of ancient Greek astronomical instrumentation. It is a bronze mechanism of extraordinary complexity, capable of predicting astronomical positions and eclipses decades in advance, and its existence is evidence that the ancient world was capable of technological achievement that modern observers have often found surprising. The idea that an ancient civilization might have created a sophisticated device capable of encoding navigational information in a star map that could be projected and read is entirely consistent with what we know about the genuine capabilities of ancient Greek and earlier Mediterranean civilizations. The film fictionalizes this in ways that are necessarily dramatic and simplified, but the underlying premise has a grounding in real historical knowledge that gives it a credibility that pure invention would not. The cultural legacy of the film in the broader Tomb Raider franchise. The Cradle of Life occupies an interesting position in the broader cultural history of the Tomb Raider franchise, which has extended across nearly 3 decades of video games, films, animated series, and associated media. The franchise began as a video game series in 1996 and has gone through several distinct phases of creative reinvention since then. The original core design games that ran through the late 1990s and early 2000s established Lara Croft as one of the most recognizable characters in gaming history. The Crystal Dynamics reboot of the game series beginning with Tomb Raider Legend in 2006 took the character in a new direction. The Square Enix origin story trilogy beginning in 2013 reimagined Lara as a younger, less experienced character whose extraordinary capabilities were forged through traumatic experience rather than inherited. And the 2018 film starring Alicia Vikander drew explicitly from that origin story trilogy in its own reimagination of the character for a new cinematic audience. Within this long cultural history, the 2 Angelina Jolie films represent a specific moment, the early 2000s, when the franchise was at the height of its original commercial and cultural prominence, and when the character of Lara Croft as originally conceived, aristocratic, effortlessly capable, and operating from a position of personal authority rather than earned experience, was still the dominant version of the character in public consciousness. The Jolie films are therefore cultural artifacts not only of early 2000s Hollywood but of a specific phase of the Tomb Raider franchise's own cultural evolution.